Well, greetings, fiction lovers. For this second part of our reading for today, I'm going to take us from page 80 through 95. Wanted to address a couple things. One is, of course, the humorous occurrence with Peter Walsh and this ridiculous pocket knife that he keeps taking out of his pocket whenever his masculinity seems to be threatened. So we've got it here as he's thinking about Clarissa, and so he's holding it out, and it seems he's doing this reflexively. He has no idea that he's doing this, but everyone around him, of course, does. So that's a great irony. And so here, I think this is a sort of Peter's. He's a difficult character to really kind of get your arms around, and I think a lot of people find him to be somewhat off-putting. But I don't know. I just kind of like the guy because he seems so, on one hand, frail and honest, and he sort of wears his heart on his sleeve and this kind of thing, which I think is somewhat refreshing. But here, he's talking about reflecting on like what he's doing in England regarding Daisy, this woman that he proposes to marry, who of course is already married, and he's as he's told Clarissa, he's coming to see attorneys. But look what he says. All this pother of coming to England and seeing lawyers wasn't to marry her, but to prevent her from marrying anybody else. Bless his heart. Is this guy ever going to be happy? It's kind of hard to imagine that he will. But let's see. So here comes a portion of the narrative that I think for a lot of people is confusing and is rather mystifying, I suppose, if you want to look at it that way. And that is the sound that interrupts Peter's reverie. A sound interrupted him, a frail, quivering sound, a voice bubbling up without direction, vigor, beginning or ending, running weakly and shrilly, and with an absence of all human meaning into E fa so fu swee tu u. The voice of no age or sex, the voice of an ancient spring sprouting from the earth, which issued just opposite Regent's Park tube station from a tall, quivering shape, like a funnel, like a rusty pump, like a wind-beaten tree forever barren of leaves, which lets the wind run up and down its branches, singing, E fa so, fu swee tu u, and rocks and creaks and moans in the eternal breeze. Okay. So, you might ask yourself the question, what in the heck is going on here? Well, here's what we're supposed to understand from this, because as the narrator is going to go on through here, through all the ages, when the pavement was grass, when it was swamp, through the age of tusk and mammoth, through the age of silent sunrise, the battered woman, for she wore a skirt, so this is an actual person there in the park, with her right hand exposed, her left clutching at her side, stood singing of love, love which has lasted 1,000,000 years. She sang love which prevails, and millions of years ago her lover, who had been dead these centuries, had walked, she crooned, with her in May. But in the course of ages, long as summer days, and flaming, she remembered, with nothing but red asters, he had gone. Death's enormous sickle had swept those tremendous hills, and when at last she laid her hoary and immensely aged head on the earth, now become a mere cinder of ice, she implored the gods to lay by her side a bunch of purple heather, there on her high burial place, which the last rays of the last sun caressed, for then the pageant of the universe would be over. And so I've made the assertion in class before that sometimes sound is just there for the aesthetic pleasure of it, and this is we're to understand this syllable cluster of sounds as a song It's the music of human utterance, and there need be no meaning for the sounds to be music. And this is essentially what Woolf wants us to experience. Now, I did look up some history of this and try to get a feel for what's happening. And as it turns out, we've got a critic who says that in Woolf's letters that her husband Leonard sang something like this, whether it's in jest or not, but it's a version of something in German, and this is from page 150 of Virginia Woolf and Inner Life by Julia Briggs. So it's Briggs who's commenting here, and so she says, this is the beggar woman who belongs to the present, the distant past, and the distant future. So she says, her song consists of a series of meaningless syllables, I, fa, so, fu, swee, tu, im, u, noises that mean nothing to her listeners, yet they are also and antithetically given a specific point of reference. For as Hillis Miller has pointed out, they are a rough translation of a German poem, Allerseelen, All Souls Day, by Hubert von Gilm. It was set to music by Richard Strauss and also by Belgian composer Edward Lassen. And so this song is concerned with the past, with lost love and the return of the dead. And so, this song was apparently part of Virginia Woolf's husband's, Leonard's repertoire. And so the English version from which this is supposed to be drawn, these are the words: lay by my side your bunch of purple heather, the last red asters of an autumn day, and let us sit and talk of love together, as one in May, as once in May. Give me your hand that I may press it gently, and if the others see, what matter they? Look in mine eyes with your sweet eyes intently, as one in May, as once in May. And so, of course, what prompts this song is, the Peter reflecting on the woman that he is proposing to marry. He's just seen Septimus and Retzia, and so it is now, once we have gotten this song in our heads, we're going to have this long scene with Retzia and Septimus, and we're going to get all kinds of backstory, not only on how they met, but also on seemingly what is afflicting Septimus. Okay, so here then is Retzia Warren Smith saying, "Poor old woman," to the beggar woman who's singing the song. "Oh, poor old wretch." And so, it's irony, I think, to think that here Retzia has pity for the old woman, but little seemingly for her husband. And so, here at the top of this page, where she says, since she was so unhappy, for weeks and weeks now, Retzia had given meanings to things that happened, almost felt sometimes that she must stop people in the street if they looked good, kind people, just to say to them, I am unhappy. And this old woman singing in the street, if someone should see, what matter they, made her suddenly quite sure that everything was going to be right. And so this thing about her, wanting to express her unhappiness, it's a disburdening that people have in terms of negative emotions, but also I think positive emotions. When something good happens to someone and you just want to tell someone, I think that's sort of equally that occasionally maybe the human body just can't take the pressure of extreme emotion, and so it comes out through laughter or screams or what have you. So my note to self is that this behavior, that what would be received as weird by the person stopped by Retzia if she was going to disburden herself, seems perfectly normal to Retzia. And it's ironic, of course, that she is so critical of her husband's odd behavior that we know it is symptomatic of a far more deep-seated, though no less painful, psychological affliction that she would think this is normal, and yet her husband's behavior as abnormal. So again, I think Woolf does a marvelous job in capturing sort of the essence of the complexity of the human experience. So note to self here at the bottom, let me point on this thing here. Is this not the great paradox of love? And that is, so they crossed, Mr. and Mrs. Septimus Warren Smith, and was there, after all, anything to draw attention to them, anything to make a passerby suspect, here is a young man who carries in him the greatest message in the world, and is, moreover, the happiest man in the world, and the most miserable. So notice that this has appeared here with Septimus, and it appeared earlier with Peter. It has appeared with Clarissa, and we're going to see it appear with other characters, Sally Seton most notably coming forward. We're going to get to meet Richard Dalloway and hear from him as well. And you just see this is a thing that runs through people. So the note here is that this long set piece that follows, where we are at the bottom of page 83, evokes, pathos in us, an emotional understanding of what's happening, a sympathy. That we grieve for Septimus Warren Smith and for all those like him and all the Smiths who died in the war and all the Smiths who will die after. In a certain way, I suppose, we are all, Smith stands for us all in the world. So what follows here over the next couple of pages, and I'm not going to really touch on too much here, is the history of a self-educated, self-made man, and what he tried to do to improve himself, before he went off to war. So as you push over here to page 85, and I really do want you to read this, what I'm now skipping over, but it's Miss Isabel Poole who is teaching him. And now we just sort of just seamlessly transition into Mr. Brewer, who apparently was a supervisor for Septimus in his job before he volunteered to go into the army. And so Septimus was one of the first to volunteer. He went to France to save an England which consisted almost entirely of Shakespeare's plays, and Miss Isabel Pole in a green dress walking in a square. It's just a great detail. Okay, then on one hand, it echoes the sentiment of Sally Seton and Peter Walsh that only England could have produced a creature like Hugh Whitbread, and only England could have produced the kind of person who, on one hand, is going to go to war to save England, okay, from the aggressors. I mean, it's the same sort of thing that would have gotten into, men who volunteered to be in the Confederate Army during the American Civil War to drive off invaders. And so on one hand, the thing that keeps him going is not just love of country, but this idea that he has of this woman, Miss Isabel Pole, in a green dress, walking in a square. And you notice that the image echo between her and Clarissa, because Clarissa is going to wear a sea green dress to her party. Okay? Lots of stuff here with respect to Septimus revealing to us what happened in the aftermath of seeing his friend Evans killed, and he seems glad that he doesn't show any emotion upon the death of Evans. And we have the repetition of this business here. He could not feel, and it's ironically the thing that prompted him to want to marry Lucrezia. It's like, okay, well, if I get married, if I bind myself to a woman, that this will prompt me, perhaps her emotional nature will prompt me to be able to feel things. But I mean, it's clear that this doesn't happen. And so you see where it says he could not feel at the bottom of 86. Here it is again. Here it is again. Okay? And as we push on to the top of page 88, again, he could not feel, he could not feel, he could not feel. So it's just, it's absolutely torturing him, haunting him. And so again, we have all this business here where he is now returned to England from overseas, having married Lucrezia. And now all the old things that used to really charge him relative to his education and the pleasure that he got in reading Shakespeare and so forth, it's as though everything in his life is devoid of flavor. Nothing tastes the same. Nothing tastes like anything now that his emotion is gone. And so perhaps this is what Wolf is saying about us all, that if you have stripped yourself of emotion for whatever reason, that it's very difficult to have a sort of fulfilling life. Okay, so let's see. We reveal here on page 89 that Lucrezia very much wants to have children. This is sort of the admonition for all young women who are married, that they're not fully a woman unless they have born children. That movie that I told you about called The Hours, which is based on this novel, there's a character there who cannot conceive. And she says to her friend, you're just not fully a woman until you've had a child. It's a really sad thing because she's got cancer that's keeping her from being able to bear children. So let's see here. So as this pushes on, the he could not feel now becomes concrete, becomes immediate. When she is Lucrezia is telling about a friend of hers who is going to have a baby, and she says to him, she could not grow old and have no children. She was very lonely. She was very unhappy. She cried for the first time since they were married. Far away, he heard her sobbing. So again, this emotional distance, as though they're not even close to each other. He heard it accurately. He noticed it distinctly. He compared it to a piston thumping, but he felt nothing. His wife was crying, and he felt nothing. It's as though he's seeing himself from above. He's removed himself from his own body. Only each time she sobbed in this profound, this silent, this hopeless way, he descended another step into the pit. And so this is going to be the metaphor that will persist for a long time into the novel as we continue to encounter Septimus Warren Smith. But here we go again with he did not feel, he had not cared when Evans was killed. That was worst. But all the other crimes raised their heads and shook their fingers and jeered and sneered over the rail of the bed in the early hours of the morning at the prostrate body, which lay realizing its degradation, how he had married his wife without loving her, had lied to her, seduced her, outraged Miss Isabel Pole, and was so pocked and marked with vice that women shuddered when they saw him in the street. The verdict of human nature on such a wretch was death. So, so here we are with yet more foreshadowing. I'm probably going to ask you a question about that, all right? And so now we get this Dr. Holmes thing. So there's a long bit about Dr. Holmes having been consulted, a recommendation from the same woman, from Mrs. Filmer, whose daughter is going to have the child, that this is someone that they can consult to get help for Septimus. And yet this Dr. Holmes is, on the one hand, he's a pushy doctor, and here literally he is pushing Lucrezia out of the way so that he can get in to see Septimus, despite the fact that he doesn't want to see the doctor. And so that you get the pushy doctor who's doing nothing useful for his patient or his patient's wife. And so then you can see here that this that all this part of the narrative devolves into Septimus he revealed this that this thing as even Holmes himself could not touch this last relic straying on the edge of the world, this outcast who gazed back at the inhabited regions, who lay like a drowned sailor on the shore of the world. I mean, yee. So here's a good example of epizeuxis for vehemence. Evans, Evans, he cried. Evans, Evans. He had said as she brought in the tray, she jumped. She did. She scuttled downstairs. Again, we have epimony for vehemence here when the doctor has forced himself in. And Septimus cried, "You brute, you brute." And Holmes is trying to be calm in that weird doctor way, thinking that if he's calm, that it will somehow calm the patient. But if you've ever experienced a doc that's doing that, sometimes it can be incredibly infuriating. Has it's antithetical to whatever his project is and trying to get you calmed down. All right, so let's see. The last thing that I'll finish up with is now that we're finishing up here at the bottom of page 93. Holmes is talking to Septimus. He's scolding him, saying, "Talking nonsense to frighten your wife." But he would give him something to make him sleep. And if they were rich people, said Dr. Holmes, looking ironically around the room, by all means let them go to Harley Street. Okay, that to consult another doctor, which is exactly where Septimus and Lucrezia are going to see Dr. William Bradshaw. If they had no confidence in him, said Dr. Holmes, looking not quite so kind. It was precisely 12 o'clock, 12 by Big Ben, whose stroke was wafted over the northern part of London, blent with that of other clocks, perhaps St. Margaret's, mixed in a thin, ethereal way with the clouds and wisps of smoke, and died up there among the seagulls. 12 o'clock struck as Clarissa Dalloway laid her green dress on her bed, and the Warren Smiths walked down Harley Street. 12 was the hour of their appointment. Probably, Rezia thought, that was Sir William Bradshaw's house with the gray motor car in front of it. The leaden circles dissolved in the air. So my note here, and the thing that I'll leave you with is, notice how the tenor or the feel of this line, the leaden circles dissolved in the air, changes depending upon what precedes it. It brings to mind color theory, that depending on, so you could take a swath of say, orange and place it next to, say, its complementary color, and the orange looks different. So Joseph Itten, if you're interested in color theory, done a lot of work in this area, and what the eye does to blend color. If any of you are familiar with like pointillism, the placement of dots of pure color near each other, the eye will blend them. So say a yellow then and a red, the eye blends it to make orange, and so forth. So anyway, that's where I'm going to stop. And if you have questions, of course, reach out.